Let's continue on to part 2 of chapter 14, creating and managing Active Directory users and computers. In the previous section, we created user objects or user accounts. We created users so they can log on. In this section, we are going to look at managing Active Directory objects, specifically at managing user objects. So let's look at the user account properties of the user we just created. We will look at login name, login times, account locked, account disabled, account expired, home folder, profile, and group membership. So I will go to the user that I created, and I will right-click and select Properties. Under the General tab, we can see that the user's first name is John, then his last name is Smith, and we could add a description and specify the address of his office. If we look at the Account tab, very important tab, we can see that the user's name is jsmith@ccbcmd.edu. And let's look at some of these user account properties. For example, under login hours. Under login hours, we can configure it so the user cannot log in from midnight till 4 a.m. He can only log in from 4 a.m. until midnight. Or under account lockout. Now this is interesting right here. We cannot lock the account. We can disable the account, but that's something different. The only way an account gets locked is if somebody is guessing passwords and they guess the password wrong too many times, and that locks the account. That's the only way an account can be locked. Now you and I, as network administrators, can then go unlock the account, but we can't lock the account. Now suppose we don't want somebody to log in, but we don't want to delete their user account. We can then select account disabled, and that makes it so the account is still there, but the person can't log on. And then if we look at account expires, you would use that in the circumstance where you knew you were hiring somebody as a temporary employee for just 90 days. So you would specify account expires 90 days after the time that the person was hired. If a user cannot log in, you would usually come to this screen here. If John Smith can't log in, first I would verify, is there a user account called John Smith? Yes, there is. Then I would make sure he's using the proper login name, which is J. Smith. I would make sure that he is not trying to log in during disallowed login hours. I would verify that the account is not locked, it is not disabled, and it is not expired. When a user can't log on, frequently there's something wrong in the Account tab of the user properties. Now let's look at the Profile tab. Profile tab controls two variables, the user profile and the home folder. First, let's discuss the home folder. If a user is at his workstation and he simply clicks on File, Save, then the file will be saved to the hard disk of the local computer where he is currently standing. It won't be saved up to the server. So if the user goes to another workstation and logs on, that file is not going to be available. So we want to make it so when the user saves a file, it's saved up to the server. So under Home Folder, we select the Connect to Radio button and we specify the path to the user's home folder on the server. So now if the user is working on a file and just clicks on Save, the user's probably not even thinking about it, but what happens is the file will get saved up to the server, to the user's folder, to a folder that corresponds to the user's login name, which in this case is J. Smith. That way, the user can go to any workstation and save a file, and the file will be saved up to the server, and then when the user goes to any other workstation, the file will still be available. And now let's look at the profile, which is a similar sort of a concept. The profile stores the user's environmental variables, such as screen colors. So if a user changes his screen colors, that is saved to the profile, which is typically saved to the local hard disk on the workstation where the user is standing. So if the user changes his screen colors on one computer and goes to another computer, the screen colors will not follow him. So what we do is we specify that the path to the profile is going to be up on the server. The same information as we have here. We specify that the profile will be saved up on the server under a shared folder called users, under a folder which has the same name as the user's login name. So that way, if a user is at one workstation and changes his screen colors, those changes will be saved to the profile, which is stored centrally on the server. So if a user goes to another workstation and logs in, the screen colors will follow the user. That way, when we select both of these variables to be saved not on the local workstation but up on the server, that way the user can walk to any workstation and he'll have the same screen colors and he will be able to access the same files. And then under member of, you can see that by default the user is a member of the domain users group. If we click on the add button, we can add the user to another group, such as the administrators group, for example. And one real common problem with users is they're always forgetting their password. And as administrators, we don't know what people's passwords are. We can't tell somebody what his password is, but we can give him a new password. So if a user forgets his password, I right-click on the user account and I select Reset Password. And then I type in the new password and I tell the user what the new password is. And then when the user logs in, he is required to change that password the next time he logs in. And then if an employee leaves the company, then we would typically delete the account. So under user account management, we looked at login name and login times. And this is a tricky one, the difference between account locked, account disabled, or account expired. We saw that the home folder can be on the local workstation or up on the server, and that the profile can be on the local workstation or up on the server. We can add a user to a group, change the user's password, or delete the user account. Suppose we wanted to manage multiple users. Suppose we wanted to change the login time of multiple users. So instead of going to one user at a time and changing that user's login time one at a time, what we do is we highlight all of these user accounts. And then if we right-click and select Properties and click Login Hours, and I select the login hours and I limit the login hours so you can only log in from 6 a.m. to midnight, and I click on OK, then that configuration parameter will apply to all of these highlighted user accounts. Allows me to modify multiple users simultaneously. What we've been looking at this chapter is mostly, in managing Active Directory objects, mostly user objects. But now let's look at managing Active Directory computer objects. We created user objects, but now let's create a computer object. So the first question you would ask is, well, I know why I would create a user object, so the person could log in. But why would I create a computer object? And the answer is so that computers can be centrally managed. So you don't have to walk around each individual computer to configure it, so it can be configured centrally from the domain controller. To do that, we can use Active Directory users and computers. Under Active Directory users and computers, not under users, but under computers, I right-click on computers and I select New followed by Computer. Then I give the computer a name, such as Workstation 1. Click on OK, and I have created Workstation 1. If I right-click on Workstation 1 and I look at Properties, under Member Of, we can see that Workstation 1 is a member of the Domain Computers group. Another way to create a user account, to create a computer account, is to use Active Directory Administrative Center. Now you know the way to get there. You click on Tools, select the first item, which says Active Directory Administrative Center, and under CCBC Local, under the Computers container, I select New followed by New Computer. I type in the computer name, such as Workstation 2, and the NetBIOS name is identical name. That's for backward compatibility. I don't click on the checkbox that says this is a pre-Windows 2000 computer because it's not. And I click on OK, and then that adds a computer account to Active Directory. And just as you can create user accounts using DSADD, you can also create computer accounts using DSADD. I go to the command prompt and I type DSADD, which stands for Directory Services Add. I type DSADD computer, close quotes, common name, equal the name of the workstation, comma, DC for domain component, equal CCBCMD, comma, DC for domain component, equal EDU, close quote. And I've successfully created the user account in Active Directory. And of course, you could use PowerShell as well. You could use the new AD computer. Now, we already used new AD user command to create a user account, but you can use PowerShell to create a new computer account. You would type new AD computer -name followed by string, and that would be the name of the computer, such as Workstation 1 or Workstation 2 or Workstation 3. 4 different methods of creating user accounts. Active Directory users and computers, using the Active Directory Administrative Center, using the command line, using the DSADD command, or using PowerShell using the new -AD computer command. Joining computers to a domain. Why would you join a computer to a domain? The reason you would join a computer to a domain is such that group policies, which are configured on the domain controller, which we'll talk about later in this class, such that the group policies will apply to that computer. When you join a computer to a domain, that will create a computer account on the domain controller at the same time. So to join a computer to a domain, we click on Start, and we go to Control Panel. Then we select System and Security, and we select System. Then we select Advanced System Settings, and to rename a computer or to change its domain, we click on Change. We can see the computer is not a member of a domain. So we click on the radio button for domain and we type in the name of the domain, followed by OK. And then it wants to know the administrator name and password for the domain controller. Because if you don't have the administrator name for the domain controller, you're not going to be able to complete this procedure. So I click on OK, and it adds the computer to the domain. To verify that the workstation has been added to the domain, we can go back to Active Directory users and computers, and under the computers container, we can see that there is the computer that we created from the command line. Another command that you can use to add computers to a domain, another command line command, is the NetDOM command, net domain command. You would go to the command prompt and type NetDOM, net domain, join workstation 1, that's the computer you want to add to the domain, /domain is ccbcmd/user administrator. And that's the person with the administrative privileges to complete this procedure, because if you're not the administrator, you can't do this, /password followed by the administrator's password. In summary, in this chapter, we looked at Active Directory objects, specifically user and computer objects. We looked at creating user objects and managing user objects and modifying user account properties. Then we looked at creating computer accounts and joining a computer to a domain. And this concludes Chapter 14. Thank you very much, and have a nice day.